This segment is going to be a whirlwind tour through the Mental Ray rendering engine. Now, Mental Ray will add some time to your render, and depending on the materials and lighting setup that you have, it could add a whole heck of a lot of time to your render. But if set up appropriately, that time will be worth it. The Mental Ray rendering engine is of a significantly higher quality than is the default scanline rendering engine. And folks, to make a little bit of a confession here, I'm honestly still trying to learn all the ins and outs of Mental Ray myself. I've taken classes, watched movies, read books, all on the Mental Ray rendering engine. And I've been using it to render for production for years. But there's so much to it that I still feel like a baby. So we're just going to have a brief overview here, and hopefully that'll spark some interest in you, and you'll go in and learn a little bit more about it and start using Mental Ray for your projects. First of all, we need to change our rendering engine to Mental Ray. So I'm going to hit F10 to get our render scene dialog box. Right here at the top, it's saying default scanline renderer. We don't want that. So let's scroll down. Under assign renderer, under production here, we get this little choose renderer ... icon. Click on that button, double click on Mental Ray renderer, and things look somewhat similar. But a few of these tabs have changed. Indirect illumination is probably the most important one. Indirect illumination is where a lot of the magic happens inside of Mental Ray. Now with 3ds Max 9, Autodesk has introduced Mental Ray 3.5. These used to be two separate applications, and now Mental Ray is included with 3ds Max. Hence, it has a different version number than Max does. But it's here under the Indirect Illumination tab that we find a lot of the power inside of Mental Ray. We can enable Final Gather, which deals with the bouncing of light, which, if done correctly, can add a lot of photorealism to your scene. Now, new to 3ds Max 9, because it's new to Mental Ray 3.5, are these custom render presets. It used to be a science in and of itself to understand all this Final Gather stuff, as well as global illumination. If you scroll down here, you'll find that there. These kind of work hand in hand to produce really high quality results. Using Mental Ray, we could also create caustics. Caustics are those little lightning looking things when you go to see a swimming pool, for example, say an indoor pool especially, and you'll see these little waves of light that remind me of lightning bolts for some reason, although they don't really look like lightning bolts, I guess. But on the side of the wall of an indoor pool, you'll see these waves of white light. Those little waves of white light are caustics, reflections from the pool. And Mental Ray has a whole little system here for handling those. I'm going to turn off Final Gather for right now. Another area that Mental Ray comes in really handy is in materials. Once you have the Mental Ray renderer selected, again, this will not work if you have the scanline renderer selected, you could hit M to get the material editor, change the material type, and we will have all of these yellow materials. Again, this doesn't work if you have the scanline renderer selected. All these yellow materials are Mental Ray materials. New inside Mental Ray 3.5 and 3ds Max 9 are this Arc and Design material and this car paint material. Another thing from my experience that Mental Ray handles really well is something called subsurface scattering. You'll see this SSS in some of these materials. Basically what that is a way to describe a phenomenon, actually you see it all the time in real life, where there's two layers kind of on top of each other. We saw this a little bit earlier when we were looking at materials, and we talked about the shellac material. You see you have that one base layer of the paint, and then you have the shellac layer on top. And they kind of interact in some really advanced ways. Well, that's an example of subsurface scattering. Skin is another one. Skin on CG characters, especially as of a few years ago, was of a very low quality. Just putting a peach-type color on Caucasian skin is not very believable. If you look at your skin, there's actually a lot happening right below the surface. And so this subsurface scattering stuff, try to say that 10 times fast, that stuff really helps when we're trying to do material like that, like skin, maybe like the top of a candle. Anytime where there's a surface and then there's something happening right below the surface that's very interesting as well. Now, one other thing I want to point out, if I close the material browser here and select the perspective viewport and hit F9 to render as usual, do you see those little lines that just popped up there? Mental Ray renders a little bit different than the scanline renderer. The scanline renderer just has a little scanline. Mental Ray has these little squares that pop up to kind of unveil the image as it's rendering. Those little squares are called buckets. And so you have this little bucket that kind of goes around your image rendering it. And the reason I bring that up is because if you have a dual processor machine, then there will be two buckets. so your rendering will be sped up significantly with Mental Ray. So I know this was just a teaser for Mental Ray, but I just wanted to open the door for you so that you know what's here. Mental Ray is an extremely powerful rendering engine. And 99% of the time, when I see an amazing render from 3ds Max, it was rendered using Mental Ray.